Hello, everyone. Today we are going to go over a second guidebook technique for creating tabbed guidebooks. This is for any of you who got my old guidebook code that's currently up on my portfolio. This is basically that. Um, there's a couple of minor things that I've tweaked just to make it a little bit better. Um, but the structure of this will be familiar enough that if you have um, the existing one and you're having problems with it, um, this should walk you through how it works pretty well. Um, I've got with the most of the tweaks are styling, and then I have one extra piece of JavaScript. The one that's currently up on my portfolio doesn't use JavaScript for anything, but this one, if you manage to follow the explanation of the JavaScript, you should be able to apply it to yours. And that's just to add the ability to link directly to a page. This particular technique, I prefer the previous one for actually setting up a guidebook, especially if there's more than a few pages. The styles on this one, because we have to be kind of explicitly declaring every single page as when it should show with the buttons and everything. It gets a little clunky if you have a lot of pages, but I prefer to use this one for sort of nested tabs. Like if on your guidebook page you want some tabbed content just sort of embedded on that page, or a secondary level of navigation kind of thing, this is good. The advantage of radio buttons is that you can have multiple sets of radio buttons on a page at once and they won't interfere with each other. I'm not sure. Hopefully we will be able to get to sort of that variation, but we'll start with using it on sort of just as your main guidebook structure today. So just like yesterday, or whenever I streamed, just like the last version, we'll start just by setting up our sort of main HTML structure. So div id equals guidebook wrapper. And then we have guidebook navigation. And guidebook pages. And for this one, because we'll be using radio buttons to do the page switching, each of our labels will be so each of the tab so navigation elements will be a label, and that will be for so just whichever pages you want. And if you do want links to something outside of the guidebook, you can do that. It requires remembering to include the links in when you're styling the labels. So but it's not too difficult. Act equals members. And then we're going to have our div class equals guide page. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the same trick that I did last time, where we're going to include some embedded pages. So you can use web pages. You can embed them in your other web pages the same way that you can embed them in your board wrappers. Like this rules page would need to have allow key use in board wrappers turned on. That setting applies to both including it in your wrappers themselves and including them in other web pages. When you include them in the web pages, you can't nest them. It'll only include one layer of it. So if this rules page was trying to include another web page, it wouldn't come through. So you do have to sort of come up with how you're going to organize everything almost in advance and just make some, right? Like if you were going to have tab navigation on your rules page, and then each of those tabs you wanted that content in a different web page in JSync to keep it organized, then you'd have to put like the rules heading and the like tab navigation in here, and then sort of include the web page for each of your sections within that page, rather than including rules and then trying to include each section in the rules page. But this will do for your basics. And this will get us started. So for each of these, I'm going to go ID equals page 1 content, ID equals page 2 content. Now, this page 1, IDs have to be unique, but they don't have to be anything specific. So you could say rules content here, you just have to make sure that you're matching it exactly in your styles when we get to that point. But again, this will get us started. So the radio buttons that will actually control the pages are going to go right up at the top inside guidebook wrapper so that we can really easily hide them because we don't want them to be actually visible. But they need to be ahead of the guidebook navigation div and the guidebook pages div, because if you put them inside guidebook navigation, then CSS would not be able to use that easily to control something in guidebook pages. There'd be a lot of sort of has and not and some of the more complicated CSS involved if the nice thing about code is almost anything's possible. Most things are not worth it. There's always an easier way to do things. So we're going to put, it's not a div. We're going to put our input type equals radio, and then it's going to have an ID of page 1 select, and then we'll grab another one for page 2. And then for each of these labels, we have to tell it which one to associate with. So we're going to use for attribute here. So it says for page 1 select and for page 2 select. And this for is used by the browser to mean that this is the label for this radio button. And just doing this by itself, with no JavaScript, no CSS, not anything, it's built into the HTML, means that if you click on the word claims, it'll select this radio button, even if those radio buttons are like on completely different parts of the page. Doesn't matter where on the page it is if you use for. The other way of using a label to make that the label text is actually part of the clickable area of the radio button is to just put the radio button itself inside the label. And for like an actual form where you're labeling each visible radio button, that's like the easiest way of doing it. But this allows us to just shove that radio button somewhere else. And we're going to hide it, and it's going to affect other things. And unfortunately, CSS, your style sheet is not going to understand this part of it. We're going to have to tell the styles explicitly that this is associated with this button and to style it differently when this radio button's selected. Your styles do know when this radio button is selected, but unfortunately it doesn't flow through to here unless we get explicit. So we're going to add an ID to this, which is page 2 label. And that'll just make it easier to write the styles a little bit more easier, a little bit easier. We could identify it to the style sheet just based off the for, but the syntax gets complicated, so we'll just add an ID here. And then the code later on will be more readable. And then the member list, of course, is an external link, so we don't need to add a page for it. We don't need to associate it with anything. So basically, this is just what we have. I have provided content for the rules and the claims pages already, so those pages exist. So if I go here and we look at what we've got now, did I save my changes? Always save your changes, kids. If we go here and we refresh the page now, we'll see that we have a link, we have 2 tabs, and if you click on one or the other of these, it'll select that particular one. It's not unselecting the other one yet, because we haven't told the browser that these are part of the same group. So the way we do that is with the name attribute. So name equals, we'll just say guidebook. Name equals guidebook. Doesn't matter, what you call it. I think on the code that's currently up on the portfolio, it might say guidebook RBL or, guidebook button or whatever you want to call it. It just has to be the same for each radio button that you want to behave as a set, and different from every other set of radio button on your page. And that's the page the way the browser sees it, not each page within JSync. The browser has no idea how you've organized your code on the back end. So if you've embedded another page in this page, then in terms of browser behavior, it's the same page. So you do have to remember that when you're sort of embedding things in each other. And then let's say, so we probably want the first page to sort of be the default that's going to show up when we load the page. Obviously right now everything's showing up because we haven't hidden anything, but we will want that first page to be the default page if you don't tell it which page to go to. And in fact, this technique, you need JavaScript in order to link directly to a different page. But we're just going to say checked here, and we're going to tell it that when the page first loads, that rules page is going to be selected the first time. I think it's checked. Now, save my changes. The other thing is if you change this or something, if you refresh the page, your browser will normally keep the same radio button selected, regardless of what the HTML says was default. You can force it to do a completely fresh load of the page by holding down Shift when you refresh it, and that will set everything on the page back to default. So if you're having trouble with some of your code and you know that you've saved your changes, but you're still not seeing some changes, holding down Shift while you refresh the page that you're testing is really helpful. So we haven't put any styles in here, so we can change which page we've selected, but we can't. It's not actually having any effect yet. So let's come down here and throw in some styles. So the first thing that we're going to do is guide page display none, and that'll hide it by default. And let's just go ahead and make this guidebook wrapper display flex. And that'll just bring our navigation onto the side so that the navigation and the page content are beside each other instead of the navigation being on top. So now we've hidden all of the page content by default, but we need to tell it to show the page that we have selected. And this is where this code gets complicated. Although once you have it set up, then you do have to edit it every time you add a new tab, but you can just copy the line above. Once you have it as a reference, then it's just copy and change the IDs. You don't have to necessarily memorize the syntax. But we're going to start with, so if we have page ID, page 1 select, and it is checked, and then the tilde is the sibling selector, so it will normally if you just put a space in your styles, it means the next selector, the next part that you're identifying, is somewhere inside the first part. The tilde means that it is somewhere after this part. So page 1 select checked, tilde guidebook navigation. Means that we are going to find the guidebook navigation section following a checked page 1 select, right? And then inside that, we can find page 1 label. And we'll make that bold. just so that we can, visually see which one's selected. And then for page 2, for the content, again, we're going to go page 1, select, checked. And then this time we're going to go look in the guidebook pages that are following the select buttons. And we're going to look for your page 1 content. And we're going to say display block. So now while rules is, I must have a typo in there because it didn't bold, but while rules is checked, the rules page will show up and the claims page won't. And while the rules page is not checked, the rules page will not show up. And we haven't told it when page 2 should show up. There's my typo. All right. We haven't told it when to make page 2 show up. So we're going to just copy this, put it down here, so we get the syntax the same. And we're going to say page 2, we're going to change page 1 to page 2 here. And then the same for the content. We'll say page 2 here and page 2 here. So while page 1's selected, we're going to make the page 1 label bold. When page 2 is selected, we're going to make the page 2 label bold. And then the same, we're going to show the content based on which select is done, which button is selected. So, all right. That's not the right label for this. So we've got our rules, our claims, right? So we're able to change pages now. This is why I said it's a pain in the butt if you have a lot of pages in your guidebook, because you have to keep updating these styles rules for every single page. Now, we also want to hide the actual radio buttons. So, guidebook, wrapper, input, type equals radio. And we're going to display none, those. So even though we've hidden them with display none, they're still going to be functional. They're still going to, have the checked status or not. This means direct child. So if I just had guidebook wrapper input radio, then this rule will hide every single radio button in the entire guidebook. Which, if you have radio button based nested tabs, might be what you want. If you have one of your guidebook pages actually being a form that you want people to submit, you're embedding one of the codes that lets people do requests through a form instead of like posting in a thread or whatever. You probably don't want to hide those, so then you'd use this greater than symbol, the sort of arrow chevron thing, and this tells it that inside guidebook wrapper we're going to hide all the inputs, but then inside anything else, like once we get a layer deeper, that rule is no longer going to apply. So which version of that you use is really going to depend on what's in your content. And just for, kind of clarity and readability, I'm going to give it guidebook. I've got a typo there. Guidebook navigation. We'll give this a width of like, I don't know, 15M. Just to sort of make it look like an actual column and not weird stuff off to the side. That'll prevent this link name from wrapping like that. And then I have to tell it also that Flexbox isn't allowed to shrink it. Because when you're inside of a Flexbox, sort of by default, it considers the width to be guidelines rather than rules. But we're going to tell it not to shrink it beyond that 15M. You could also, instead of using flex shrink, you could say min width 15M, because Flexbooks will take the width as sort of guidelines only, but it will respect your min width or your max width. And now they're doing that. So we do want them in a column. So for that, we need guidebook wrapper or guidebook navigation label. And again, I'm going to restrict this to just the guidebook navigation, not the entire guidebook wrapper, so that, if you do have forms inside of your guidebook, or you do have other tabs that you want styled differently, like you do want those tabs horizontally across, whatever, this rule will not affect anything inside guidebook pages. It'll only affect the main guidebook navigation here. And we'll give this display block. And that will make these labels behave like divs in that they take up the entire, they're an entire line, one or more lines, the full width, rather than, just being just the size of that text and being able to flow like normal text. And we've got links here, and we do want them to behave the same way. So again, inside guidebook navigation, we're going to say that links also are going to be one to a line. And now that looks sort of a lot better. We've got our, when we load the page, we've got a default page set. If we want to change pages, we can do that. And if you refresh the page, it'll stay on the specific guidebook page that you're currently on. Which is, other than making it look pretty, that's your guidebook functionality. So this is a little bit more complicated than the first strategy that I showed last time. You've got to have these extra radio button elements where before we could just get along with having our navigation items without needing this other thing to maintain the state. And the other technique, we could just have a couple of, the one style rule applied to all of the pages by default, whereas this one we have to list every single page that we want to show up or to be bold or whatever. If we every single item that we want the behavior to change based on the radio button state, we have to list them individually the um, in the styles here. The advantage is that we don't need any JavaScript to do this indication of which page we're currently on in the navigation. And that means that if you don't need to link specifically to an individual page in your guidebook, if you just want people to go to the start of your guidebook and read through from there, and you'll only ever link to the first page of your guidebook, you're basically done here. If you do have things like claims pages or other reference pages that you want, that you expect your sort of older, more experienced players who've wrapped their heads around most of your lore, most of your rules, everything, they don't need to read the entire guidebook anymore, but they are going to go to individual pages like the claims page or whatever. And you want to be able to link to those individual pages specifically. At that point now, we do need one line of JavaScript. And this is not complicated, but it does, it's not a big script, but it does have a couple of things. So at this point, what we have distinguishing our pages is page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. That's which is totally fine. The browser doesn't care. And so that's what we have to use to identify our pages in the links as well when we link directly to a specific page. So to link directly to the claims page here, it's going to be hashtag page 1 or hashtag page 2 or hashtag page 3 rather than hashtag rules, hashtag claims. If you want it to be, if you want the URL to be more readable and have that sort of hashtag rules, hashtag claims, hashtag lore, hashtag, whatever as part of your URL that's sensible rather than just page 1, page 2, page 3, we can set this up to do that. We just have to change, all of these. So we change this ID, and we change the for because otherwise that breaks this relationship. Oh. They need to be unique, so claims. So page 2 is going to become claims. And then because this ID has changed, we need to change it here. And technically, that's the only thing. So the script is only going to care about this ID right here. And so wherever this ID is referenced, obviously we have to change it everywhere in the code, everywhere in the rest of the code. We don't necessarily have to change this. Again, the computer doesn't care what you call things as long as you're consistent. Right? So I'm saying if rule select, then page one, if I've selected the rules checkbox, then I'm going to show page one. That's fine. That will work. If you have 20 pages, it's probably, the code becomes less readable if you're mixing up that. So you might want to change, rules. You might want to change every single page one identifier to rules and every single page one identifier to, or page two to claims everywhere in the code, which makes the whole thing more readable. But that's, again, sort of up to you, technically. I do recommend changing it because if you reorder your pages, the advantage of doing it with rules and claims and factions and lore and whatever instead of page one, page two, page three is that if you reorder your pages, everything still makes sense, your code still makes sense. You're not going to, when you come back to edit this page in 6 months, a year, when you want to add some more pages in, you're not going to get confused and forget that this is an ID and not an order, right? Like this, if I move this up here, it's now the first page, but it's still page two. Whereas if you name it claims, then there's no confusion. It's obviously always the claims page. But for this script to be able to link directly to a page, we are going to so jQuery, and we're going to use backticks because that allows us to sort of directly embed variables inside of the string rather than rather than having to put a string and then the plus symbol and then your variable and then the rest of your string, whatever. So to embed something in your string, it's this syntax. So location hash is going to catch this part of the URL, including the hashtag here. So location hash underscore select, because this already includes the hashtag for the ID, this just straight up like this is going to match the ID here, because jQuery expects the hashtag, same as CSS does, but it's going to be included in location hash. So this is exactly the same as if we did it this way, right? Where you've got location.hash and then we're going to add that to underscore select. It really doesn't matter which one you use. I'll probably I'll use this one in the code that I have to be able to copy off of my portfolio, because this is the syntax that I normally use, but it doesn't matter which one you use. And what we're going to do is we're going to find the select radio button that's associated with the hashtag that we've added to the URL, and we're going to have JavaScript click it for us, and that's it. Now, this will only run on page load. And the browser will identify this as instructions to scroll to a certain part of the page. So if I change this just directly in the URL bar like this, then it won't refresh the page. It'll try to scroll to the part of the page that's called claims. We don't have anywhere that uses just claims by itself as the ID of an item or as an anchor. So it literally doesn't do anything. But again, I can sort of hold down Shift and hit refresh, and that will force it to completely reload the page with that as part of the URL, but it will reload the page. So even though I held down Shift, which would normally send me back to the default, it's left me on the claims page because of here. So again, if I hold that, if I change this, so let's say we have a link directly to rules, right? I change it in the URL, nothing changes here because the page hasn't refreshed, because this is not part of the page. This is not part of what gets sent to the server when it's requesting a page. It's not actually part of the page address. It's instructions to the browser. But with this rules here, I can shift refresh, which will behave as if this is just a link that I've come to for the first time with this included. And then it will select the rules page for me. So we can, end this this one line of code. So the code that I have on my portfolio right now as a guidebook template it doesn't have the guidebook pages. It just has the divs, the guide pages, sort of directly after the navigation. Only one of them is being shown at a time. You can treat, guide page class as a singular item in your styles because only one of them will ever be showing at the time. Adding in this guidebook pages wrapper does give you a little bit more flexibility in the styles. There are some skins that want a couple of layers of borders, or they want the sort of guidebook page itself to be a fixed height, and then the content, as you change the tabs for each of those contents, to be scrollable instead of adjusting the page height every time you change tabs. So having this wrapper allows for those kinds of styles, but it doesn't affect the functionality other than needing to be included in this CSS rule here. But this, because it is just affecting the radio buttons, if you have my previous code up and you've got your IDs set up with the underscore select, or if you're using any radio-based guidebook and you've got your IDs as underscore select, then this will work to be able to link directly to individual pages. If your radio buttons don't have underscore select, if they have some other consistent pattern to the IDs, you can just change this here to match what your IDs are. And if it's, so if your ID is just rules and claims, then you take this off. And, if it's, RB rules, then you'd put RB underscored in front of the location, assuming that's consistent on all of them. And then you could use just rules and just claims as the hash. And yeah, if there's no pattern like that, then you just take that off and you just have You're just using the location hash by itself, and then you'd need to put in, you know, the exact literal full ID of your select buttons as your page indicator here. So if you have, especially if you have a lot of pages already, and they're set up, with different IDs than this sort of underscore select pattern, it's probably easier to change the script than to change, every single one of your IDs in, whatever to match the script, because this is only one line. But if you have if you're just starting out, you want a brand new guidebook, I will have this code on the portfolio maybe next week, and you can just copy paste it and start from there. And then, as you add pages, you just need to remember to add this, update these two style rules for each of the pages as you go. And if we want to use this code for sort of embedded tabs on each website, on each page within the guidebook. Let's say we've got, our factions page. And we've got some introduction text, sort of introducing the concept of factions and stuff. And then we want to have tabs for sort of each faction, so they can pick the faction that they're interested in without having to scroll all the way down to the bottom. Then we can use sort of the same technique, but we're going to change some things to use IDs rather. We're going to use some classes rather than IDs, so that you can use the tabs on multiple pages of your guidebook rather than having, then you just have one set of styles, and you're not writing more styles for each individual page, and everything's consistent throughout your entire guidebook. And we're going to change the IDs and things so that it's not conflicting with the main navigation if you're also using this technique or any radio button technique for the main navigation. So the first thing is that we can't link directly to a specific tab on a specific page with this, because one, it might end up conflicting and breaking your, you don't want to we want to make sure we're not conflicting anything, right? But if you tell it to select a tab on a page, you can get it to do that, but that won't automatically select that specific page. So if you're going to link to a specific tab, you'd have to link to the page and to the tab on the page sort of at the same time, which is very complicated. Possible if you absolutely need that functionality. That's a paid code, because there's like some extra logic in there where it has to figure out which page that tab is on and all sorts of nonsense. And especially if you're using different technique for your overall guidebook navigation, like you're using the previous technique, it gets messy. So we can link to a specific page in the guidebook, whether we're using this technique or the previous technique, to set up that main navigation. But when you go to a specific page, it's always going to be the first tab, or whichever tab you've got as default set up here. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that this is not conflicting with the other ones. When you select a tab, you don't want it to suddenly unselect the page that you're on and hide it, right? Like that's no good. So we're going to change this from guidebook tabs to like page 3 tabs, or guidebook page 3 if that makes more sense to you. Guidebook dash factions, whatever. Again, it has to be the same for everything in this group of tabs and different from the name of every other group of tabs. And other than that, the browser does not care what name you give things as long as you're consistent. Consistent where it needs to be consistent and unique where it needs to be unique. That's the only thing that really matters. Everything else is just so that your code makes sense to you when you come back 6 months later and want to change something. Now, so for this, we need the IDs for each radio button to be unique throughout the entire guidebook. Because again, this is a tabbed guidebook, we're loading the entire thing onto the browser page at the same time. So the entire guidebook needs to have every ID everywhere, needs to be completely unique throughout your entire guidebook. So we can make this like page 3, section 1, and then page 3, section 2, and then if we also have tabs on page 1, then they would be page 1, section 1, page 3, section, or page 1, section 1, page 1, section 2 on the first page, and then on the third page of our guidebook, we've got page 3, section 1, page 3, section 2, and that sort of thing. And a type equals radio, and we still have the checked for whichever one of this group that we want checked. Guidebook ID, we can't have this as the same ID as the guidebook wrapper because we don't want any kind of conflicts with our styles or with our JavaScript or anything. So we're going to change this to a class. Again, we want to be able to be consistent when we have sets of tabs on multiple pages. So we'll use a class, and then we can use the same class for every set of embedded tabs, and we only need to create the styles once. So we're going to say guidebook tabs wrapper. We've got our very unique IDs for our radio buttons, and then we need to make sure that those are exactly the same on the for attribute of our labels, so that these labels and the input tabs, clicking on the label will will select that correct radio button. So that has to be exactly matching. And then we'll just go and make the prefix for our sections sort of the same. And then we'll have the name for each faction or whichever section that you want, whatever you want your tab labels to be. Theoretically, you could put a link in here, but it stops making quite as much sense. So I'd say just straight up don't confuse your users, because generally you're going to want this for tabbed content, where you've got your tabs across the top like this, and you're swapping tabs out. And that means, just because that sort of, it feels like tabs then, and your users kind of know what to expect when they click on things, know what's clickable. That's very important. It doesn't help to have things if your users don't realize that they can get to them. So we'll just set up 3 tabs here. Section 3, Section 3. And that one will need a radio button as well. So page 3, Section 3 select, and the same name because it's part of the same group. So these are not guidebook pages, they're guidebook tabs, and we're going to use a guidebook tab content. Say guidebook tabs content, that makes sense. And we're going to use all classes for these things, because then again we can share the styles between our different different sets of tabs. And even here, I could say it's an ID here. I don't want to repeat this for every single set of tabs on every single. It's a pain in the butt, right? It was already a pain in the butt when we did it for our main navigation, which is why I like the previous technique better if I'm setting up a brand new guidebook. This was a very common. I set up all my guidebooks like this for ages, because some of the styles for both the previous technique and for the one that I'll do next stream, some of the style selectors that those depend on didn't exist, several years ago. So being able to take advantage of new things is the advantage of making new things. But your old things still work, so that's fine. So at this point, because this is going to be embedded on the guidebook using, if we're embedding this on the guidebook using, sort of the embedded web pages technique, then we can't then have embedded web pages for each of the sections as well, because we can only go one layer deep. So we'll have to put the content directly on this page. And again, if your introduction content is very small and your tabs content is very large, and you do want to put that, each tab on its own web page in JSync so that you can edit those more easily, then sort of all the rest of this needs to be embedded, needs to be included directly in your guidebook. So it does work that way too, but generally I tend to do it this way, where each page of the guidebook is its own web page in JSync rather than each section. Usually this is more content than each of the pages. So the way that I organize my websites, this makes the most sense. So we've got our tab 2 content here. This is a class so that we can reuse the styles on different pages. And so actually, let's say that these are guidebook tabs, and then we've got guide tab content as our class. So that's going to be the class that we use to guide tab content is going to be the class that we use to style everything. But I'm going to go ahead and make this not an ID. I'm going to go ahead and make this a class as well. So page 3, section 1 content, and page 3, section 2 content. we're going to make those classes, and we're going to make this a class. And we're going to take out page 3 here. We're just going to say section 1 label, section 2 label, section 3 label. And we're going to make a class here for each of these sections. And this class, so the ID has to be completely, you have to have a completely unique ID so that you can associate it with the label and have clicking on the label be, actually change the radio button state. But we're going to use classes, completely use classes for the styles, because on page 1, you'll have a section 1 select, which will affect the section 1 label, which will affect the section 1 content. And then on page 2, you can have a section 1 select that affects the section 1 label and the section 2 content. Right? Whoops. Section 2, section 3. Right? So it doesn't matter which page it's on. Right? Section 1 select will always affect the section 1 label and the section 1 content. Section 2 select will always affect the section 2 label and the section 2 content on that page. And then, we only have to create the styles kind of once. So let's go through here, and we're going to take that off because we don't want, we're going to put the tabs across the top. So having these two as just normal blocks in the navigation first and then the guidebook tabs second, they're going to behave like normal divs. Tabs are going to be above the content. Don't need to do anything funny like that. So this is our guide tab content. So our guide tab content by default is going to be display none. And everywhere that we have guidebook wrapper, we're going to use the guidebook tabs wrapper class now. So all of the inputs inside the guidebook tabs wrapper are going to be hidden. So if on your guidebook wrapper you said we're going to hide all radio buttons inside the wrapper, doesn't matter, hide them all. We're not using any forms anywhere that we do need to show them on. Then you might not need to replace this. But, it doesn't hurt to say it twice either. And obviously, if your main guidebook wrapper is using a different technique that doesn't use radio buttons, then you wouldn't have included that rule. And because we've used the class here, this will automatically apply to every set of tabs. So that's fine. And then we've got our guidebook navigation. Again, we're not having that as a second column. So we don't need that rule at all. And then for our labels, okay, so we're not embedding any links in the guidebook tabs. If we have reference links, we can include it in that sort of introduction area. It makes less sense to include it in the tabs here. But we probably want a little bit of styling on the guidebook tabs. So display inline block will let us add, like a margin and a padding to them without it being weird. Inline elements, because they're like a part of a paragraph kind of idea, they can have horizontal padding but not really vertical padding, or if you do put it on, it'll affect the background color, but it won't actually affect the spacing of it. So if you want things like buttons to be, to be able to wrap beside each other like normal text, but also to actually have height and width and all of that stuff, inline block is the first thing that you do. And then just like, we'll make them not run into each other, we'll give them a margin. And what I did here was I just said, we're just going to go ahead and this guidebook tabs navigation, I'm also going to give it pform strip, because pform strip is a class that's used in your posting form, in your user control panel, a whole bunch of places. So I know that like no matter which skin is being used at the moment, this is going to have some kind of style associated with it, and it's going to match the rest of the site vaguely. Obviously, I could also just assign styles to it directly. If I want my guidebook to look a very specific way, we'll cover that in the future, because that kind of styling decision isn't to do with this particular technique. So we'll do a stream that just covers, how to make it look good in the future. So we got our input type radios. We've got our tab labels, sort of styled slightly differently than the rest of the, somewhat differently than the rest of the text around them, so that it's obvious that it's like a heading for the following sections, and our buttons not running into each other, so that it's obvious that they're not, part of the same sentence somehow or whatever. And then again, we are going to need to rewrite our rules that tell it which tab content to show and tell it which tab label to indicate is selected. And now we can use those classes that we set up. So section 1 select, section 2 select. It's not guidebook navigation, it's a class, and it's guidebook tabs navigation. And then section 1 content, we're doing the labels. So section 1 label. It's a class, section 1 label. And so I have to repeat this at least once more because I've got 3 tabs on this page. If I have, 3 tabs on this page and 4 tabs on another page and 5 tabs on another page, I only need to repeat this 5 times. And because if I go down all the way to, 4 or 5, 3, 4, 3, oops, 3, section 4. This will accommodate up to 4 tabs per page, and whether I have 2 or 3 or 4 tabs on a page, this will apply to all of them. And then if I need more for some of my pages, but I only need to do this for like up to the maximum number of tabs that I have on any page, because we're using the classes instead of needing to do 3 lines for this page, and then 2 more lines of code for the next page if we were using IDs. So let's give us, so again, we've got section 1 select, section 2 select, right, we've got our guidebook tabs class here, because that's where we are holding all of our pages. and then we've got section 1 content and section 2 content, and we've got more than 2 tabs, so we'll just have to add some more lines here. You can always, sort of go gung-ho when you're setting it up and be like, I probably won't have more than 4 tabs on each page, 6 tabs on each page, whatever. Set up extra, and then you can add up to that amount later on. Having additional style rules doesn't really hurt anything. So we've got our styles accommodating up to 4 tabs, and we're actually using 3 of them. Let's change this to tab 3 content just to be clear what we're doing here. So if I go over here, and we're going to refresh this page again. Edit web page. So ID equals main title. That's not right. Class equals main title. We've got our, introduction content here. What have I got here? That's working, but they're all... Alright, so I'm using font weight bold as the selector, but on this skin, p-form strip is already bold. So I have to tell it that inside that's guidebook, tabs, navigation. That's why that didn't apply. So that the guidebook tabs .p-form strip. So I can say guidebook tabs navigation. I can also be really specific and say if an element has both the guidebook tabs navigation class and the p-form strip class, and you notice there's no space between them. So these are applying to the exact same element. If it has both of these classes, then we're going to font weight normal. If I just said, p-form strip, it would apply to everything. If I just said guidebook tabs navigation, that's a single class. And if these styles end up in my style sheet ahead of the normal class, the normal styles definition for p-form strip, this is only a single class. If this is only a single class, and that's only a single class, and that one's after it, it'll overwrite it. Because this is 2 classes, I'm being more specific. So any kind of styles that are associated with p-form strip by itself can no longer overwrite this. It can apply additional styles, but this specific font weight normal is more specific, so it will overwrite it regardless of what order things end up in my style sheet. If I put these, into my style sheet, which, you do want, if you put them in the style sheet, then they're available for all of your web pages with no extra effort. If you put them in the web page, they're available for all of your skins with no extra effort. You don't need to copy them over from skin to skin. So usually I recommend putting things like layout and these kind of functionality things in your web page, and like this could go in the main guidebook page instead of copying it to every single child page that has tabs. And then you'd only need 1 copy of it. and it just applies everywhere. Um, but then it wouldn't apply if you linked like literally directly to that web page like this, um, right, without having the navigation around it or anything. So where you put your styles really depends on how you've got your site set up, where you're planning on linking to, how many skins you have. Um, Even if you've only got one skin, I'd at least put this in the web page itself. One, if you edit the web page, the styles to edit are right there. You don't need to go digging in your style sheet to go edit it. And two, just because you have only one skin doesn't mean that you're not going to, switch skins in the future and buy a new skin or whatever, and then be really confused as to why your guidebook stopped working. But I put everything to do with, sort of colors and font choices and things that need to match the surrounding item, skin sort of look and feel. I'll put those in the style sheet because I don't necessarily want those carrying over from skin to skin. But yeah, so let's see this. So now we're doing better here. We've got faction 1. I can click on faction 2. I got tab 2 and tab 3. That means I've got a typo here, right? Faction 3 is showing up when I've selected faction 2 because I've got a typo right here. So if I've got it as section 3, correctly labeled, then it'll show up when I have faction 3 selected. So, right? So it's really the same structure. It's really the same conceptual idea, whether you're using it as tabs or as your main navigation. It's just the when you have it on tabs, and there's the possibility of having it on like different sets of tabs on different pages, you have to be a little bit more careful about making sure that your IDs don't conflict with each other, and using classes instead of IDs for your styling so that it does apply across the board. Technically, there's no reason not to do classes for your styles for your main navigation as well. Right? You could give your main class also section 1 select as a class. Section 2, like, use these classes for your main navigation and have, these apply to your tabs and your main navigation, especially if you only have 3 or 4 pages in your guidebook and then each of them has 3 or 4 tabs. Maybe you want to treat the main navigation as if it was tabs as well. But it just depends on what you think is going to be more confusing for you when you come back, in 3 months, 6 months, a year to add more content or to edit your content or whatever, or if you come back to do any kind of debugging and stuff. You also end up, sort of, if you've nested the same class inside of itself, like if you're using, guidebook wrapper, if you're using the class guidebook wrapper for your main wrapper and then also for your tabs wrapper, then, when you come down here and you've got section 1 content, you need to start making sure that you're doing this so that when you have page 1 checked, it's not trying to also always show section 1 on that page of your actual tabs, and so on, right? So you can limit it that way, but distinguishing more between your main navigation and your on-page tabs is sort of worth the extra styles, I feel. And I'll have both versions that you can just copy paste off the site, so it should be reasonably reasonably straightforward to do that. Um, so this can be added to, and the way I've got the classes set up, and the way I'm using, um, sort of these patterns of IDs that I'm recommending, you should be able to drop this on any guidebook and not have it conflict because you're being so specific with your IDs in your classes. Um, so hopefully this will work for anybody. So I'll take off now. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. And I hope you come back next time.